The message arrived at 3:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Tuesday in March. It was not, as humanity had always imagined first contact would be, a graceful mathematical sequence or a friendly greeting encoded in universal constants. It was not the hopeful olive branch that generations of scientists had dreamed of receiving. It was an ultimatum. Dr. Sarah Chen was the first human being to decode it. She sat alone in the Arecibo Observatory's secondary control room, her cold coffee forgotten beside her keyboard, her eyes burning from 18 hours of continuous work. The radio telescope had picked up the signal 3 days prior, a concentrated burst of electromagnetic radiation originating from a point approximately 4.3 light-years away in the direction of Alpha Centauri. At first, the scientific community had celebrated. Champagne was opened in universities across the globe. Talk show hosts discussed the implications with barely contained glee. Religious leaders gave sermons about humanity's place in God's vast creation. Politicians prepared speeches about a new era of cosmic cooperation. Sarah had been more cautious. Something about the signal's structure bothered her. The way it repeated, the aggressive frequency, the sheer power behind it. This was not a tentative hello from a civilization hoping for friendship. This was a broadcast designed to be heard, designed to be impossible to ignore. When she finally cracked the encoding, a mathematical framework based on prime numbers that seemed almost deliberately simple, as if the senders wanted to ensure even primitive species could understand, her blood ran cold. The message translated roughly as follows. To the inhabitants of the third orbital bodies surrounding the yellow dwarf star designated Sol 3 by our cartographic indices, your electromagnetic emissions have been detected and analyzed. Your species has been observed for approximately 3 of your planetary rotations around your star. You have been evaluated and found to be a Category 7 threat species, aggressive, territorial, technologically primitive, yet displaying concerning patterns of exponential development. In accordance with the Galactic Preservation Mandate, you are hereby ordered to cease all electromagnetic emissions immediately. You are forbidden from developing faster-than-light travel technologies. You are forbidden from leaving your planetary system. Compliance will be verified. Failure to comply will result in sterilization of your world. This is your only warning. The hegemony of the Varnkal, supreme custodians of the Orion Spur. Sarah read the message 7 times. Then she reached for her phone and called her supervisor. Within 6 hours, the message had been verified by 14 independent research institutions across 5 continents. Within 12 hours, it had been shared with every major world government. Within 24 hours, it had been leaked to the press. The world went mad. Admiral James Morrison had served his country for 38 years. He had commanded nuclear submarines during the Cold War, led carrier strike groups in the Persian Gulf, and spent the last decade helping to shape military policy from behind a desk at the Pentagon. He had seen humanity at its worst, the atrocities, the cruelty, the seemingly endless capacity for self-destruction. But he had also seen humanity at its best. He had watched young soldiers throw themselves on grenades to save their comrades. He had witnessed medics work for 72 hours straight in field hospitals, refusing to stop even as their own wounds went untreated. He had seen enemies become allies and allies become brothers. He had learned, over the course of his long career, that humanity was not a species that responded well to threats. Now he sat in the Situation Room beneath the White House, surrounded by the most powerful men and women in the United States government, and he felt something he hadn't experienced since his first deployment as a young ensign: genuine uncertainty.
"We have to respond," Secretary of State Margaret Williams was saying. "We can't just ignore this. If there really is an alien civilization out there, if they really do have the capability to sterilize our planet, then we need to open a dialogue. We need to buy time."
Buy time for what? That was General Thomas Park, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. To develop weapons we can't even conceptualize? To prepare defenses against an enemy we know nothing about? We don't even know if this message is genuine. For all we know, this is some elaborate hoax.
"The signal originated from Alpha Centauri," said Dr. Raymond Foster, the president's science advisor. "Over 4 light-years away. The energy required to send a focused transmission of that magnitude is beyond anything we could produce with current technology. This is not a hoax."
President Michael Torres had been silent for the past 20 minutes, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his dark eyes moving from speaker to speaker. Now he spoke, his voice quiet but commanding. "The question isn't whether this is real. The question is what we're going to do about it."
"With all due respect, sir," Admiral Morrison said, leaning forward, "the question is what they expect us to do about it, and I don't think they've thought that through." Every eye in the room turned to him. "Explain, Admiral." Morrison stood, moving to the wall-mounted display that showed a visualization of the message's content. "Look at the language they used. Category 7 threat species. Aggressive. Territorial. They've been watching us for 3 years. They've seen our wars, our conflicts, our history of violence. And their response was to send us a threat." He paused, letting that sink in. "These Varnkal, whoever they are, have made a critical error in judgment. They've assumed that because we fight among ourselves, we'll capitulate when faced with a superior external force. They've assumed that our aggression is a weakness, that it makes us cowards who will back down when confronted." Morrison shook his head slowly. They couldn't be more wrong. Secretary Williams looked horrified. "Admiral, you're not suggesting we antagonize them further? They threatened to destroy our planet." "I'm suggesting," Morrison replied, "that we do what humanity has always done when faced with an existential threat. We adapt, we innovate, and we fight back." "Fight back against an interstellar civilization?" General Park sounded skeptical. "We don't even have a permanent presence on Mars. How exactly do you propose we fight back against enemies who can send messages across light years?" "The message took over 4 years to reach us," Dr. Foster said slowly, his scientific mind working through the implications. "That means they're operating on the same physical constraints we are. They don't have instantaneous communication. They probably don't have instantaneous travel either." "Which means," President Torres said, "that we have time." "Exactly, sir," Morrison nodded. "They said they've been watching us for 3 years, but that data is also 4 years old by the time it reaches them. As of right now, they have no idea how we've responded to their message. They won't know for at least another 8 years. 4 years for any signal from us to reach them, and 4 years for any response to come back." "8 years," the president murmured. "At minimum. And that's assuming they sent their fastest ship the moment they transmitted that message. If they waited for our response, we could have 16 years or more before any physical confrontation." The room fell silent as the implications of this sank in. Finally, Secretary Williams spoke again. "What are you proposing, Admiral? That we use that time to prepare for war?" "Not just prepare for it, Madam Secretary." Morrison's eyes were hard. "Win it." The next 18 months were the most transformative in human history. The initial panic following the message's leak was predictable. Riots in major cities, runs on banks and grocery stores, a surge in apocalyptic religious movements. Some people proposed immediate surrender, arguing that resistance against an advanced alien civilization was futile. Others advocated for sending a conciliatory response, hoping to negotiate better terms. But as the weeks passed, a different sentiment began to emerge. It started small. A viral video of a factory worker in Detroit giving an impromptu speech to his coworkers. "My grandfather fought the Nazis," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My father fought in Korea. My brother died in Afghanistan. And you're telling me some aliens think they can just send us a letter telling us to stay in our place? To give up on the stars?" He shook his head, his jaw set with determination. "I don't think so. I don't goddamn think so." The video was shared millions of times. The phrase, "I don't think so," became a rallying cry, printed on t-shirts and spray-painted on walls. Within weeks, similar sentiments were being expressed in every language, in every country, on every continent. For the first time in recorded history, humanity began to truly unite. The United Nations convened an emergency session that lasted for 3 weeks straight. Old rivalries were set aside. Territorial disputes were frozen. Trade wars and tariff battles were suspended indefinitely. When the session concluded, a new organization had been born, the United Earth Defense Coalition. Every nation on Earth, from the great powers to the smallest island states, signed the treaty. Every military was integrated into a single command structure. Every scientific institution was given full access to shared research databases. Every factory, every shipyard, every laboratory was redirected toward a single purpose: survival. Dr. Sarah Chen found herself elevated from a relatively obscure radio astronomer to one of the most important people on Earth. She was appointed director of the newly formed Xeno-Intelligence Division, tasked with analyzing everything humanity knew about the Varnkal and preparing for potential future communications. "We know almost nothing," she told Admiral Morrison during their first meeting. He had been appointed Supreme Commander of the UEDC's military forces, a title that made him uncomfortable, but which he had accepted out of duty. "The message tells us they have faster-than-light travel, or at least they imply they do, with the Galactic Preservation Mandate. That suggests they're part of a larger interstellar community. A community that apparently doesn't like newcomers," Morrison observed. More than that, the term Category 7 threat species suggests they have a classification system. They've done this before, evaluated civilizations, issued ultimatums, carried out punishments. Sarah's voice caught on the last word. "Admiral, we may not be the first species they've threatened. We may not be the first they've destroyed." Morrison was silent for a long moment. "Then we'll have to make sure we're the first that fights back." The scientific community threw itself into the challenge with a fervor that bordered on obsession. Within 6 months, breakthroughs began to cascade. Fusion power, which had been perpetually 20 years away for decades, suddenly became viable when 3 separate research teams, sharing data freely for the first time, solved the plasma containment problem simultaneously. Orbital manufacturing capabilities expanded exponentially as every spacefaring nation combined resources. The first permanent lunar colony was established in record time, its population growing from 12 to 1,200 within a year. But the most significant developments were happening in secret. Deep beneath the Swiss Alps, in a facility that had once housed particle physics experiments, a team of physicists led by Dr. Hans Müller was pursuing the impossible: faster-than-light travel. The Varnkal message had forbidden humanity from developing such technology, but it had also proven that such technology existed, and if it existed, it could be understood. If it could be understood, it could be replicated. Dr. Mueller was a small, intense man with wire-rimmed glasses and a habit of muttering equations to himself while pacing. He had devoted his entire life to theoretical physics, and until the message arrived, he had believed he would die without ever seeing practical applications for most of his work. Now he was racing against extinction. The problem, he explained to the oversight committee that reviewed his progress every month, is that we have been thinking about space travel incorrectly. We have been treating space as a fixed background through which objects move. But space itself is not fixed. It is malleable. It can be stretched, compressed, folded. He pulled up a simulation on the holographic display, a flat sheet of fabric with 2 points marked on opposite ends. Traditional travel means crossing this distance. He traced a line across the fabric. But if we can fold the fabric itself, he manipulated the display, bringing the 2 distant points together until they touched. Then distance becomes irrelevant. An Alcubierre drive, one of the committee members said. The concept has been around for decades. We've never been able to generate the energy required. We hadn't cracked fusion power decades ago either, Mueller replied. We have now. And more importantly, we have motivation. The Varn call travel between stars. They don't do so using magic. They use physics, the same physics that governs our universe. We simply need to understand that physics better than they think we can. How long? Admiral Morrison's voice came through the secure connection. He was attending remotely from a command center that orbited the Earth in geosynchronous orbit. How long until you can give us something we can use? Mueller paused. 3 years, he said finally. Perhaps 4, for a prototype. Perhaps another decade for reliable travel. We might not have a decade. Then I suggest you find ways to buy us time, Admiral, because this is our best chance. Part 2. The Response. It was decided, after months of debate, that humanity would send a response to the Von Call. Not a submission, not a plea for mercy, but not an overt declaration of war either. The message was crafted by a committee of linguists, psychologists, xenobiologists, and military strategists. Every word was analyzed, debated, and refined until it carried exactly the meaning they intended. Dr. Chen personally oversaw the encoding process, ensuring that the response used the same mathematical framework as the original message. She wanted there to be no ambiguity, no possibility that the Varn Call could claim misunderstanding. The final text read, "To the hegemony of the Varn Call, your message has been received and understood. We acknowledge your superior technological capabilities. We recognize the threat you have issued. But we reject your authority. Humanity has not survived countless generations of hardship, conflict, and self-improvement to be caged by fear. We have crawled from the primordial oceans, spread across our world, reached for the stars. We have made war upon ourselves, yes, but we have also made peace. We have hated, but we have also loved. We have fallen, but we have always risen. You call us a threat species. You are not wrong. We are a threat to anyone who would cage us. We are a threat to anyone who would destroy us. We are a threat to the complacency of the universe. We will not cease our electromagnetic emissions. We will not abandon our pursuit of the stars. We will not submit to your mandate. If you wish to sterilize our world, you are welcome to try. The United People of Earth." The message was transmitted from every radio telescope on Earth simultaneously, a concentrated burst of defiance directed at Alpha Centauri. It would take 4.3 years to arrive, another 4.3 years for any response to return. But humanity wasn't waiting. Commander Elena Vasquez had been selected for the most important mission in human history.
At 38 years old, she was a veteran astronaut with 4 spacewalks and 18 months of cumulative time in orbit to her name. She was physically fit, mentally stable, and possessed of an almost supernatural calm under pressure. She was also completely terrified, though she would never admit it. The ship she commanded, the UES Prometheus, represented the culmination of 3 years of frantic technological development. It was powered by a fusion reactor that could sustain continuous operation for decades. Its hull was reinforced with metamaterials that hadn't existed 5 years ago. Its weapon systems were experimental, theoretical, made practical through sheer determination and unlimited funding. And it carried, in its engine room, the first functional Alcubierre drive ever constructed. Final systems check complete, her first officer, Lieutenant Commander David Park, reported. He was the son of General Park, who had passed away the previous year without seeing the fruits of his advocacy for aggressive defense. David had inherited his father's skepticism, but also his sense of duty. "We are ready for departure, Commander." Elena looked around the bridge at her crew of 12. They were the best humanity had to offer. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, all cross-trained for maximum flexibility. They were also volunteers, every one of them, fully aware that they might not return. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "we are about to do something no human has ever done. We are about to leave our solar system. We are about to make first physical contact with an alien civilization." She paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "The Varnkal believe they know what we are. They have observed us from afar and concluded that we are primitive, violent, easily cowed. They sent us an ultimatum and expected us to grovel." A fierce smile crossed her face. "Let's show them how wrong they were." The Prometheus engaged its conventional engines first, accelerating out of Earth orbit and into the void beyond. For 3 days, they traveled through their home system, passing the Moon, passing Mars, passing the asteroid belt. Elena spent most of that time in simulation, running and rerunning scenarios for what they might encounter. Then, at a distance deemed safe by Dr. Mueller and his team, the Alcubierre drive activated. The sensation was indescribable. Reality itself seemed to stretch and compress around them. The stars outside the viewport smeared into streaks of light, then snapped back into points as the drive stabilized. Instruments indicated they were traveling at approximately 12 times the speed of light, a velocity that would have seemed like magic just 5 years ago. "Drive is stable," the chief engineer reported, his voice filled with wonder. "All readings nominal. We are actually doing this." "Time to Alpha Centauri?" Elena asked. "At current velocity, approximately 130 days. Elena nodded. "Set a rotating watch schedule. I want all systems monitored continuously. And someone start compiling everything we know about the Varnkal. We're going to need every advantage we can get." The Varnkal homeworld was called Varn Prime in human translations, a term that failed to capture the quasi-religious significance the name held for its inhabitants. It was the 4th planet orbiting Alpha Centauri b, a tidally locked world with one face eternally scorched by the red-orange sun and the other frozen in perpetual night. The Varnkal themselves had evolved in the twilight zone between these extremes, a narrow band of habitable territory that ringed the planet. They were tall, slender creatures with elongated limbs and translucent skin that revealed the complex network of their internal organs. Their eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangle on their flat faces, were adapted for low light conditions and could perceive wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation invisible to humans. They had achieved spaceflight approximately 50,000 years before humanity had discovered fire.
High Arbiter Zinrax, supreme leader of the hegemony, contemplated the latest intelligence reports from the Sol system with mounting unease.
The primitives had responded to the ultimatum. This in itself was unusual. Most species that received the mandate either immediately fell into despair and compliance or descended into internal chaos that made further intervention unnecessary. The humans had done neither.
Instead, they had unified.
"This is unprecedented," murmured Advisor Kelvosh, who stood at Zinrax's side. "In 40,000 cycles of issuing the mandate, we have never observed such a response. The primitives are actually accelerating their technological development."
"They cannot threaten us," Zinrax said, but his tone was less certain than his words. "Our fleet could sterilize their world in moments. They possess no capability to prevent it."
"That is true, High Arbiter, but I am concerned about the trajectory of their advancement. In the 3 cycles since we sent the mandate, they have achieved stable fusion power, expanded their orbital infrastructure by a factor of 12, and established permanent colonies on 2 additional bodies in their system."
Zinrax's feeding tendrils twitched, a sign of agitation. They were supposed to cower. They were supposed to abandon their ambitions. Instead, they have embraced them. I have reviewed the intercepted communications from their world. They speak of us as motivators. They thank us for giving them purpose. The High Arbiter turned to face his advisor fully. "Thank us?" The humans have a curious psychological trait. When threatened, they do not simply respond with fear. They respond with defiance. They become more than they were. Their entire history is a record of this pattern. Every catastrophe, every challenge, every existential threat, they have overcome them all and emerged stronger.
"Then we will simply have to ensure the threat is absolute," Zinrax decided. "Dispatch the cleansing fleet. 12 capital ships should be more than sufficient. No warning, no negotiation. Sterilization upon arrival."
Kelvosh bowed his head in acknowledgement, but his own feeding tendrils remained agitated. He had studied the humans extensively over the past few cycles. He had seen their wars, yes, but he had also seen their art, their music, their capacity for love and sacrifice. He had watched recordings of humans shielding children with their own bodies, of humans working together to pull strangers from wreckage, of humans choosing death over betrayal. He had, in his most private moments, felt something he had never experienced when contemplating any other species in the galaxy. He had felt afraid. The Prometheus dropped out of warp in the outer reaches of the Alpha Centauri system on day 133 of its journey. "I'm reading multiple artificial structures," Lieutenant Park reported, his voice tight. "Approximately 2,000 individual objects, ranging from small satellites to something very large, orbiting the 4th planet." "On screen," Elena ordered. The main display flickered, then resolved into an image that made her breath catch in her throat. The Varnkal had built a ring around their planet. Not a natural ring like Saturn's, an artificial one, a continuous band of metal and composite material that completely encircled Varn Prime at its equator. It was massive, easily visible from their current position millions of kilometers away, and it glittered with the lights of what had to be cities, stations, habitats.
Jesus Christ, whispered Dr. Anna Kowalski, the ship's xenobiologist. That structure alone is larger than anything we've ever built. The engineering required, the resources.
We knew they were advanced, Elena said, keeping her voice steady. That's why we're here, to see exactly how advanced, and to let them see us. Commander, I'm detecting active scanning signatures directed at our position, the sensor officer reported. We've been spotted. Good. Elena straightened in her chair. Transmit our identification signal. Let them know exactly who we are and where we came from. The bridge fell silent as the transmission was sent. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Then the response came. You unidentified vessel, you are in violation of the Galactic Preservation Mandate. You have been warned that faster-than-light travel is forbidden to your species. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will be met with lethal force. Elena smiled grimly. Well, that answers the question of whether they're willing to negotiate. She turned to her helmsman. Set a course deeper into the system. Take us to within visual range of that ring structure. Commander? The helmsman looked uncertain. They just told us to stand down. I heard them, but we didn't come all this way to be polite. Elena's eyes hardened. We came to gather intelligence, and we came to send a message. Execute my order. The Prometheus accelerated, driving deeper into enemy territory. Behind them, sensor readings began to show pursuit. Dozens of smaller craft launching from various points throughout the system, converging on their position. Commander, they're catching up, Park warned. Their vessels are faster than ours under conventional drive. Then we won't use conventional drive. Elena looked at the chief engineer. How quickly can you spin up the warp field? To full power? 15 minutes minimum. The capacitors need time to charge. We don't have 15 minutes. Give me what you can. The chase that followed would later be studied in military academies across human space for centuries. The Prometheus, outgunned and outmaneuvered, dodged and weaved through the Alpha Centauri system with an audacity that bordered on insanity. Elena used every asteroid, every moon, every gravitational anomaly to her advantage, forcing her pursuers to constantly adjust their formations. 3 times the Varnkal ships opened fire. 3 times the Prometheus's experimental shields absorbed the impacts, though each hit pushed them closer to failure. Warp drive at 60% capacity, the engineer called out. That should be enough for a micro jump. Get us out of here, Elena ordered. Set coordinates for the outer system. The Prometheus flickered and vanished, leaving behind a dozen confused Varnkal patrol ships and a sensor record of a human vessel that had not only violated the mandate but had escaped their grasp. High Arbiter Zinrax received the report of the incursion with disbelief. They came here? He rose from his contemplation throne, his feeding tendrils writhing. They traveled 4.3 light-years to our very doorstep? A single vessel, High Arbiter. Kelvash's voice was carefully neutral. Small, lightly armed, but equipped with a functional faster-than-light drive. They evaded capture and escaped. This is impossible. They were primitive. They had no spacefaring capability beyond their own system. That was accurate when we sent the mandate. It appears circumstances have changed. Zinrax processed this information. The hegemony had ruled the Orion Spur for longer than most species had existed. They had encountered thousands of civilizations, evaluated each one according to the mandate, and culled those deemed threats. Never, not once in 40 millennia, had a species responded to the mandate by developing FTL travel and sending a vessel to their homeworld. "The cleansing fleet," he said, finally. "What is its status?" "Currently in transit. Estimated arrival at the Sol system in approximately 200 of their planetary days." "Recall them." Kelvosh blinked all three eyes in surprise. "High Arbiter? We need more ships. The humans have proven more capable than anticipated. I want the full might of the hegemony brought to bear on their world. No chances, no margin for error. Assemble the Grand Armada." "That would take cycles to arrange. The resources required." "I don't care about the resources. I want those creatures extinct." Zinrax's voice dropped to a hiss. "They have embarrassed us in our own system. They have defied the mandate. They have proven that they are exactly the threat we assessed them to be. And I will not have them spreading through the galaxy, contaminating the order we have built." Kelvosh bowed. "As you command, High Arbiter." But as he left the throne room, his own thoughts were troubled. The humans had sent a single small ship. An unarmed ship, essentially. Its weapons were laughable compared to the firepower of the vessels that had pursued it. And yet it had escaped. It had outmaneuvered a dozen patrol craft and vanished into warp before they could bring it down. It was almost as if the humans had been testing them. And that thought frightened him more than anything else. Part 3. The Reckoning. Commander Vasquez and the crew of the Prometheus returned to Earth as heroes. The intelligence they had gathered was invaluable. The Prometheus's sensors had recorded everything. The structure of the Varnkal orbital ring, the configuration of their patrol ships, the characteristics of their weapons fire. Human scientists and engineers studied every byte of data, adapting and improving their own technologies. But more important than the intelligence was the message their survival sent. Humanity had traveled to the stars. Humanity had faced the Varnkal in their own backyard and escaped. Humanity was no longer a primitive species cowering on a single planet. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The next 5 years saw an explosion of development that dwarfed even the frantic pace of the immediate post-message period. The Alcubierre drive was refined, improved, made more efficient. Where the Prometheus had traveled at 12 times the speed of light, the new generation of ships could reach 50, then 100, then 200. Shipyards orbiting Earth, Luna, and Mars worked around the clock, producing vessels of every size and configuration. Some were explorers, sent to survey neighboring star systems and identify resources. Others were warships, armed with weapons that combined human ingenuity with insights gleaned from the Prometheus's sensor recordings. And some were colony ships, carrying thousands of humans to new worlds, spreading the species across the stars. The Varnkal had warned humanity not to leave their system. They had demanded that humans remain caged on their single planet, their single star. They had assumed that this command would be obeyed. They had assumed wrong. By the time the Grand Armada of the hegemony finally departed for Sol, a fleet of over 1,000 capital ships, each one capable of devastating a planet's surface, humanity had established permanent colonies on 7 different worlds in 5 star systems. Each colony was defended, each colony was armed. And each colony was prepared to fight to the last. Admiral James Morrison was 73 years old when the Grand Armada entered the Sol system. He had spent the past decade building humanity's defenses, transforming a scattered collection of hastily assembled warships into a genuine fleet. He had trained officers, developed tactics, and prepared his species for the confrontation he had always known was coming.
Now, standing on the bridge of his flagship, the UES Defiance, a dreadnought 5 kilometers long and bristling with weapons, he watched the sensor display as 1,000 alien ships dropped out of warp near the orbit of Neptune.
"Well," he murmured to himself, "here they are at last." The message from the Varnkal fleet was predictable: surrender or die. High Arbiter Zinrax himself delivered it, his alien face filling the view screen, his translated voice cold with disdain. "Primitive creatures, your defiance has brought destruction upon you. Behold the power of the hegemony. Behold the fate of all who challenge the mandate. You will be sterilized. Your colonies will be sterilized. Your species will be erased from existence. This is the consequence of your arrogance." Morrison waited until the transmission ended, then opened a channel of his own. "High Arbiter Zinrax, my name is Admiral James Morrison. I speak for the United Earth Defense Coalition and the 7 billion humans who call this system home. Your threat has been heard. Your ultimatum is rejected." He paused, letting that sink in. "For the past 10 years, you have underestimated us. You saw a primitive species bound to a single planet, and you assumed we would remain that way forever. You issued your commands and expected obedience. You assumed fear would keep us in line. But you made one critical mistake, High Arbiter. You showed us that there was something out there worth fearing. And humans, we don't respond to fear the way you expected. We use it. We harness it. We transform it into determination, into innovation, into an unstoppable will to survive. Every threat you've ever made, every moment of terror you've inflicted, you've made us stronger. Your ultimatum united our species like nothing else in history could have. Your technology gave us something to strive for. Your arrogance gave us purpose. So thank you, High Arbiter. Thank you for making us who we are today." Morrison leaned forward, his eyes hard. "Now let me show you what that means." The Battle of Seoul lasted for 3 days. Humanity's fleet was outnumbered nearly 3 to 1. The Varnkal ships were more heavily armed, with millennia of development behind their weapon systems. On paper, it should have been a slaughter. But war is not fought on paper. Admiral Morrison had studied every scrap of data from the Prometheus's mission. He knew the capabilities of the enemy vessels, their reaction times, their tactical patterns. He knew that the Varnkal had not fought a serious adversary in thousands of years, that their military had grown complacent, their officers more concerned with status than skill. He exploited every weakness. Human ships were faster, more maneuverable, piloted by crews who had trained in chaos and improvisation. They didn't fight in rigid formations like the Varnkal. They swarmed, they feinted, they struck and retreated and struck again. They used the asteroids of the belt as cover, the moons of the gas giants as anvils against which to hammer enemy squadrons. And they used weapons the Varnkal had never encountered before. Humanity had spent 10 years not just replicating alien technology, but improving on it. Their shield systems were more flexible, capable of redirecting energy rather than simply absorbing it. Their missiles carried warheads designed specifically to penetrate Varnkal armor. Their electronic warfare systems sowed confusion through enemy communications, isolating ships, causing friendly fire incidents, turning the Grand Armada's size from an advantage into a liability. On the second day, the Varnkal flagship was destroyed. High Arbiter Zinrax died in the explosion, along with most of the senior command structure of the hegemony. Without central leadership, the remaining ships fell into disarray. Some tried to retreat, only to find human vessels blocking their path. Others surrendered, transmitting signals of distress that humanity chose, magnanimously, to acknowledge. By the end of the third day, fewer than 100 Varnkal ships remained functional. They were corralled, boarded, and their crews taken prisoner. For the first time in 40,000 years, the hegemony of the Varnkal had lost a war. Part 4. The Aftermath. The news of the Grand Armada's defeat spread through the Orion Spur like a shockwave. Other species, those who had been conquered by the hegemony, those who had been cowed by the mandate, those who had submitted and survived in subjugation, watched with disbelief as reports filtered in. A primitive species, classified as Category 7 and targeted for sterilization, had not only survived but triumphed. The invincible fleet had been broken, the supreme custodians had been humbled. And humanity was not stopping. Within a month of the Battle of Sol, human ships appeared in Varnkal space once again. Not a single scout vessel this time, but a full fleet, 300 warships, accompanied by troop transports and orbital bombardment platforms. Kelvosh, now the acting leader of the shattered hegemony, received the human ambassador in his private chambers. He was surprised to find that the human was female, a concept that the Varnkal, who reproduced through budding, found biologically confusing. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen. "You've come a long way from decoding our initial message," Kelvosh observed. His translator rendered his words into passable English. Another adaptation the Varnkal had been forced to make in the wake of their defeat. "I have," Sarah agreed. She was older now, gray streaking her once black hair, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "I've spent the past decade preparing for this moment, preparing for the day when we would meet face to face." "And what do you intend? Conquest? Destruction? We are prepared for either." Sarah shook her head. "Neither. We're not here to do to you what you would have done to us. We're better than that." Kelvosh's feeding tendrils twitched. "Then why are you here?" "To offer you a choice." Sarah sat down across from him, folding her hands on the ornate table between them. "You've ruled this region of space for 40,000 years. You've evaluated countless species, eliminated those you deemed threats, controlled the rest through fear and force. That ends now. You cannot possibly hope to maintain order across the Orion Spur. You are a single species, limited in numbers, new to interstellar travel." "We're not going to maintain order," Sarah interrupted. "We're going to encourage chaos." Kelvosh stared at her. "I don't understand." "Every species you've subjugated, we're going to free them. Every world you've quarantined, we're going to open it. Every civilization you've kept locked in their home systems, we're going to give them the stars." "That's madness. The galaxy will descend into war. Species will compete for resources, for territory, for dominance. There will be conflict, suffering, death on an unimaginable scale." Sarah smiled, and there was something fierce in that smile, something that made Kelvosh's secondary heart skip a beat. "Yes," she said, "there will be conflict. There will be competition. There will be struggle and strife and all the chaos that comes with freedom. But there will also be growth. There will be innovation. There will be alliance and cooperation and love and all the beautiful things that can only exist when beings are free to choose their own paths." "You've kept the galaxy in stasis for 40 millennia, Kelvosh. You've prevented war by preventing life. You've maintained peace by crushing anyone who might disturb it, and in doing so, you've robbed countless species of their potential. We're here to change that.
You're here to make everything worse. We're here to make everything possible. Sarah stood, preparing to leave. The hegemony can be part of this new era, or it can be swept aside by it. The choice is yours.
She paused at the doorway. But I suggest you choose quickly. The first freed species are already beginning to rebuild their fleets. And they remember what you did to them. The decades that followed were tumultuous, exactly as Kelvash had predicted. Wars broke out across the Orion Spur as newly freed species settled old scores, competed for resources, and struggled to find their place in a suddenly much larger universe. Billions died. Civilizations rose and fell. The carefully maintained order of the hegemony collapsed into a patchwork of alliances, rivalries, and neutral zones. But humanity did not stand apart from this chaos. They dove into it head first. Human merchants appeared in every trading hub, offering goods and services and technologies. Human diplomats mediated disputes, brokered treaties, and built coalitions. Human explorers pushed ever outward, mapping new systems, making first contact with species the hegemony had never even discovered. And human soldiers fought, not to conquer, but to defend. They protected species too weak to protect themselves. They intervened in genocides. They stood between predators and prey and said, simply, no further. They weren't always successful. They weren't always right. Sometimes their interventions made things worse. Sometimes they backed the wrong side, or misjudged the situation, or simply arrived too late. They were human, after all, flawed, imperfect, prone to error. But they kept trying. They never stopped trying. And slowly, gradually, something remarkable began to happen. The chaos settled. The wars subsided. Former enemies found common ground. Trade routes stabilized. A new order began to emerge. Not the rigid, fearful peace of the hegemony, but something more organic, more alive. The Galactic Council was formally established 127 years after humanity first received the Varn-Kull Ultimatum. It wasn't a government exactly, more a forum, a place where representatives of dozens of species could meet, negotiate, and resolve disputes peacefully. Its founding charter, drafted by a committee that included humans, Varn-Kull, and 11 other species, established basic rights for all sentient beings: the right to freedom, to self-determination, to travel the stars without fear of annihilation. Dr. Sarah Chen, now 147 years old thanks to human advances in life extension technology, delivered the opening address. 127 years ago, she said, her voice still strong despite her age, my species received a message from the stars. It was a threat, an ultimatum, a demand that we remain small, remain silent, remain confined to our single world forever. The beings who sent that message believed they understood us. They had watched our wars, our conflicts, our seemingly endless capacity for violence. They classified us as dangerous, as a threat, as a species that needed to be contained. They were right. A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. Sarah smiled. We are dangerous. We are a threat to tyrants, to oppressors, to anyone who would deny other beings their fundamental right to reach for the stars. But we are also so much more than that. We are dreamers. We are builders. We are healers. We are the species that walks into the darkness and lights a fire. The Varn-Kull sent one message to Earth.
They should have stayed silent, because that message awakened something in us. It united us, drove us, transformed us into something we might never have become otherwise. And now here we are, not as conquerors, but as partners, not as masters, but as equals, standing together on the threshold of an era that none of us could have imagined a century ago. The universe is vast. It is old. It is filled with wonders we have only begun to discover. And for the first time in recorded history, we will explore it together. Not in fear, not in submission, but in hope. She paused, looking out at the assembled delegates, beings of 100 different forms, 100 different histories, 100 different cultures. "Welcome," she said, "to the future." Epilogue, 1,000,000 years later. The being that had once been human, in a time so distant that the very concept of individual biological species had become quaint, contemplated the universe. It existed across multiple dimensions now, its consciousness distributed through networks of thought that spanned galaxies. It had witnessed the birth and death of countless stars. It had participated in the reshaping of reality itself. And it remembered. It remembered a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. It remembered a species that had crawled from the oceans, spread across continents, reached for the heavens. It remembered wars and peace, love and hatred, suffering and transcendence. It remembered a message that had arrived one night, 3:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Tuesday in March. The Varnkal were long gone now, absorbed into the collective consciousness that all species eventually joined, their individual identity preserved as a thread in the vast tapestry of minds. They had learned, over millions of years, that the humans had been right, that struggle was not weakness, but strength, that conflict could forge unity, that the chaos of freedom was infinitely preferable to the stasis of control. They had sent one message to Earth. They should have stayed silent. But in the end, even they were grateful that they hadn't, because that message had set in motion a chain of events that led not to humanity's destruction, but to its apotheosis, and through humanity, the apotheosis of all sentient life. The universe was stranger now, richer, more complex than anyone could have imagined. It was filled with beings of every conceivable form, exploring every conceivable possibility, reaching toward every conceivable dream. And at the heart of it all, woven through every mind and every moment, was the legacy of a small, fierce, stubborn species that had refused to surrender. That had looked at the vast and terrifying cosmos and said simply, "We don't think so."